This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and Review. And what I'm reviewing today is 2024's Nosferatu, directed by Robert Eggers. I watched Nosferatu, and how I tend to approach reviews is that I don't write them instantly. Instead, I watch, I give the movie a day or two to gel in my mind, and then I prepare a script. And having done that, what genuinely surprises me about Nosferatu is that I didn't know whose movie it was. It's not really Count Orlok's movie, because while he is in it, he is not seen very often. It is not Thomas Hutter's movie. And while he is the person that ventures to Transylvania and introduces Orlok to his wife through a locket that he has, it's not his movie either. It's not Helen Hutter's movie either, despite the fact that she is also in the movie quite a bit. And the reason it's not her movie is that beyond her relationship, shall we say, with Nosferatu, she is a very whingy character. She just kind of complains and she has spells. Frankly, I found her a little irritating. And it's not her movie either. And this is a serious issue. I just didn't know whose movie it was. Now keep in mind, I didn't see the original movie. I want to say it was 1922. Nosferatu, A Symphony of Terror. I have not seen that movie. Though, I can't imagine it's so muddy in terms of its focus. But that aforementioned focus is not the only problem with this movie. There are others. So let's for a moment look at what makes this movie really impressive. And that is Robert Eggers' eye for design, his eye for details. He is almost fanatical. By the way, they built an entire, I want to say a city block, give or take, for this movie. And the buildings look wonderful. They look very real. They look very time-worn. It's a gorgeous movie. The costumes are gorgeous. It just looks so researched. And that care is applied to most of the things in the movie. Objects, be it a book or a chest or whatever, are just so intricate and so beautifully designed. It is a remarkable looking movie. The acting is also very good. It's well done. But as I said, what fails this movie is Robert Eggers' story based upon Nosferatu, A Symphony of Terror. It's not about anyone. There are characters in it. Actions are happening, but it's not really about any of the characters. By way of example, if you've seen Francis Ford Coppola's version of Dracula, that's different. In that movie, Gary Oldman plays Dracula, but Dracula is very vital to the story and is very dynamic, and action swirls around him almost like a tornado. And there's no question, at least in my mind, whose movie that Dracula belongs in. But this is not Count Orlok's movie, and that's a problem. When I first heard about Nosferatu being developed by Robert Eggers and how it was very much a passion project for him, it confused me, because this movie was released during the Christmas season of 2024. And I was thinking that it's doomed. Why would someone see a tragic story like this on Christmas? It really confused me. And I thought the movie was going to fail. And that would be a pity, because it is probably Robert Eggers' most expensive movie to date. Never mind, it's the follow-up to The Northman, which was not successful at the box office. Now the thing about Nosferatu is that it's based on Dracula, and in fact, Bram Stoker, his widow, sued them for copyright infringement, and therefore every copy of Nosferatu, A Symphony of Terror, was confiscated. And in fact, the version of Nosferatu you can find on various streaming services is not from a complete movie. What the producers did was to assemble various cuts into a complete film. So it's the French and I believe the German cut of Nosferatu, neither of which was complete as I understand it, that were assembled to get the version of Nosferatu you can find on, let's say, Tubi, for instance. So if watching Nosferatu you thought to yourself, this is awfully familiar, that's because you have seen this before. Whichever version of Dracula you're familiar with, Nosferatu shares the same DNA. The beats are the same. Certain aspects are different, of course, though overall it is the same movie as Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I mentioned earlier that I thought that Nosferatu would not do well, and I was wrong. Though I didn't expect to be quite as wrong as I was. It earned just over $181 million on a $50 million budget, which is really good. And it's so impressive that this movie was relatively cheap, because when you see it, the sets, the costume design, the makeup, it's really kind of remarkable that Robert Eggers was somehow able to do this for a measly $50 million. It is a feast, visually speaking. By my reckoning, the weakest thing about Nosferatu is Robert Eggers' screenplay. Very little about it feels organic or natural. It feels very confined and fairly static. There's no real life in it, which is really strange. Because, once again, if you compare it to Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula, that's the opposite of it. It is a cult movie. And while it's a movie that I think I will watch again, I'm not in any particular hurry to do so. It just so lacks passion. As I said earlier, it's gorgeous to look at. It's well shot. It's very well acted. But it's just so cold. And it's a movie revolving around love, ironically enough. The feelings that Dracula has for Helen never feel that well drawn out. And once again, the actors are pretty good, and I don't blame them because they weren't directing it. Robert Eggers his whole approach to this movie doesn't resonate. It should be a fiery, passionate movie, and it's not. As I said, it's fairly static, and there's a lifelessness, a listlessness to it that do not benefit the material. And the thing is, for a movie revolving around essentially love, it is very unerotic. There is partial nudity, particularly female. Well, there is a full frontal of Count Orlok, if that's your thing, but there's nothing passionate about it. And while I think it's a great thing, Robert Eggers doesn't look at these type of things with, let's say, Zack Snyder's eye, which for me comes off very exploitative and really cheap at points. Robert Eggers is very passionless in his approach. It's just a cold, uninvolving movie. And it's really strange because, once again, it is so well done and it is so gorgeous to look at for the most part. Another thing is that the editing and some of the choices of what to include and what not to include are kind of odd. For instance, when Thomas Hutter is sent to Transylvania to facilitate the purchase of some property in London for Count Orlok, the movie spends literally 0 time getting him there. Now, I'm not being hyperbolic. You see him at one point in London. The next scene, he's in Transylvania, approaching a village of Romany that he seeks shelter with. It's such an odd choice. There could have been interest generated in the character by showing us some of that travel. There are no airplanes in this time. I believe it's 1830s in Germany. So the idea that he instantly gets there was very odd and strange. And it wasn't something I enjoyed. It was just quite an odd jump from one point to the other. Another thing is that Robert Eggers, as a director, is known for his very studious approach to his films, how little details are relevant. Now, the original Nosferatu took place in Germany. So does Robert Eggers' film. But the thing is, no one speaks German. In fact, the actors are British for the most part. Lily Rose Depp isn't, but most of the actors, and Willem Dafoe isn't. I believe he's Canadian. But in any case, there are no German actors in this movie. And the language that people are speaking is not German. And it kind of bothered me because I thought it was a missed opportunity. And they could have done what John McTiernan did in The Hunt for Red October.
Sia, idu kaktats, blažen, botrosvujuši i kranjaši adježdu svaju. I on sabralek na mjesto, nazivaемое по-еврейски Armageddon. And the seventh angel poured forth his bowl into the air, and a voice cried out from heaven, saying, It.
Another character who was really odd was Herr Knock, Mr. Knock, essentially, who was the person who ran the realty company that sent Thomas to Transylvania to work with Count Orlok. This character literally loses their mind and becomes a slave to Count Orlok's whims. But the movie introduces you to him for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. Doesn't spend much of any time with him, and the next time you see him, he's out of his mind. But my thing is that I didn't even know that was him. And in fact, I was wondering who that character was. The physical transformation is so drastic, and like with Thomas's trip to Transylvania, none of that information that led to it is given. Suddenly he's just being weird and just bizarre without any real lead-in to why he was so weird and bizarre. It was very strange. And by taking away that scene, you're undermining the narrative somewhat, because Mr. Knock, or Herr Knock, plays an important role in the movie. But his character isn't really given time to establish themselves, and we never know who they are. We just really see them when they totally lose their shit. Another thing is that if you watch the extras for Nosferatu, the makeup job for Count Orlok is pretty remarkable. But the thing of it is, Robert Eggers keeps him in shadow for, I want to say, 3/5 of the movie. You barely see him in the movie. And remember I mentioned earlier that this movie should be revolving around him? It really doesn't, because even if he's present, you can't see him. You might see his hands, you might see part of his face. You never see him clearly. This was a mistake. And it just confuses me why you would make a movie about a character you don't reveal. I get the idea that Eggers was trying to create an air of mystery and to obscure his incredible monster to the last moment. And I sympathize, but at the same time, the way it was handled was just so unsatisfying. Why he just did not reveal Count Orlok earlier, I mean really reveal him, show us, the audience, what he looks like outside of shadows, was just confusing and really strange. And once again, it led to this ambivalence about this movie, where I don't know whose story this is. The original Nosferatu, A Symphony of Terror, was a black and white film. Robert Eggers' version of Nosferatu is not black and white, but the color palette is so washed out. Everything is either a shade of gray or brown. Some of the women's dresses are very colorful and showy, but those are fairly rare. Everyone else is just wearing muddy colors. Now, that may be period accurate. I don't know enough about that period of time to dispute that, but he's taken liberties with the original story. Why not take a few more with this world? It is so gray, and visually speaking, once you get over how great the buildings look and so on and so forth, how authentic things feel, it's just kind of muddy. And this is a problem in more ways than you might think, because when Count Orlok does arrive in London, it doesn't look significantly different from when he wasn't there. Now, sure, you see more rats, but on the whole, it looks very much the same. And that's a problem, because Count Orlok, who seems to be wanting to take over the world, which is interesting, is a character that is this menace that threatens not only Helen, but seemingly the entire world. Why London, when he does so, doesn't really change visually? It's, once again, one of those missed opportunities, and that's something I keep saying about this movie. Nosferatu is a gorgeous movie, but I wish more of that care were directed at the screenplay, because it doesn't counter any of the visuals. Characters have no real depth to them, and therefore the oppressive environment is something they can't rise above. Everyone is just under a shadow, pardon the pun, and it doesn't work particularly well. At least I don't think it does. And another thing is the character played by Willem Dafoe. You can tell Robert Eggers wanted to do more with this character, and I suspect there's more on the cutting room floor, but there's just not enough information given. And I have a sneaking suspicion that Eggers didn't want Willem Dafoe's character compared to the character who played a similar role in Dracula, particularly Francis Ford Coppola's Dracula. So therefore, he gave him no real presence. He's there, but his character is fairly weak, and not nearly as interesting as the version from Francis Ford Coppola's movie. As I said, Nosferatu is gorgeous to look at, but it is not a great movie. And that's a pity, because the seeds are certainly there. So what do you think? This is Brian with ScreenFiles.com and review. Do you agree, disagree? Let me know down below. And as usual, consider a like, follow, or buy me a coffee.